Well, hello, coaches. Coach KW back here again for another video. Today, we're going to talk about three things that I think your U10 players can learn to identify and adapt to within the game. Soccer is a very fluid, flexible game, and as the game gets bigger, 9v9 and 11v11, it's a lot harder for the coach to influence what the players are doing in the game flow, meaning not at full time, not at halftime, not at the beginning of the game, but when things are going on the field. And some of the skills that players need to have is to recognize what the opposition is doing that may be unexpected from what the pregame thought was when you set your team up to go play. And in 7v7, I feel like there's three things that can be learned by your team to be identified by them, and you can use game time as another training slash learning exercise so that your players start to recognize that. So the first thing that I think is important for players to be able to figure out is what is the other team's formation? How are they set up? Now, we know that we espouse that we play in the 1-2-3-1 formation. We work our players on all that sort of thing in practices and stuff like that. But also, it's good for you with your tactics board on the sideline during games, during practices, to talk about what it is they might see, what they might come up against as other formations. And so there's usually a fairly common set in 7v7. I have a whole video on different kinds of formations that are out there, but really there's three that you see the most often. And far and away, the most common one you see is this one here, the 1-3-3. It seems to just be the generic idea of the dad or mom coach that this seems safe. There's two lines of three. We got a lot of defenders. We got a lot of attackers, et cetera, et cetera. Go watch my video on why I think these formations are not as good and as flexible as this formation. And more importantly, why I think this formation is training each of the types of positions that you're going to need when you get to 11v11, where I don't feel like most of these other ones don't. But I challenge my team at the beginning of a game. First 5 minutes, can you figure out what formation the other team is playing? And at first, obviously, I'm usually having to tell them as third graders because they haven't had a lot of exposure or experience to it. But very quickly, you'll get one, and then two, and then three players week after week after who start to pick it up relatively quickly. Maybe your subs on the bench pick it up first, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a great skill to have because it helps then inform these players as they get older and more experienced playing 7v7 that, hey, if they're playing this, then we know that we can exploit that in these different ways. And they also may have some natural strengths in their formation that may match up against us in a different way that we need to be aware of. So, for example, without getting into too much detail, a lot of times in the 3-3, while people, design it to think like, hey, we can cover the whole field, what really happens most of the time is it becomes very narrow. And that just means that we expose the flanks as obvious areas that we can play the ball and get down into their area. The other thing that sometimes happens with the 3-3 is when they drop into the box, it gets very congested. So playing out wide to play crosses becomes very difficult because there's just a lot of bodies. Even if we push two or three players into the box, they may have five or six in that area. And so what we also know with the 3-3 is a lot of time there isn't a lot of depth. So that means that if you can play up against their back line, there's usually opportunities if you play the ball out wide and the ball comes back in, they start to split apart, and now you can play that killer ball right up the middle and cut through their final line. And so doing that in games eventually trains your players on how to deal with that. The second most common one we see is the 2-2-2. And again, we talk about that in our video. Again, it can become very narrow or it can become very split apart. And again, having your players understand what they see in front of them. And of course, the last most common one we see is what we play, the 1-2-3-1. And I'll be honest with you, my kids get excited when we play another team that plays that because unfortunately, it's probably 10% of the teams we see who also play this way because they're just not getting some really good instruction, to be honest with you. So when we play a team like this, We know we're probably going to have a good game. We're going to be up against it. We're going to be challenged, which is great, because then it really becomes, who can do this better? Do we have individual plays? Do we make smarter plays? Whatever it might be, but it usually means that my players really have an exciting and fun game, because they recognize, hey, they're doing stuff that we're doing. They kind of get jazzed by it, which is kind of cool. So that's the first thing, is recognizing what you're playing up and against. The second and third ones are related to each other in opposite ways. So the first one I'll talk about is recognizing how the other team processes goal kicks. If you play a team that plays like this, like we do, the 1-2-3-1, 9 times out of 10, they also play goal kicks the way we do. And so again, it makes it exciting, because our pressing strategy, if you go and look at my pressing video, I talk about how we have a structured press, and you should too, so kids aren't just running willy-nilly, because you're teaching your players to be positionally aware in the game. It becomes a game of cat and mouse. Can we do the press better than they can execute the play out of the back? But many times, what you'll see is some variation of ball gets lumped out to one side or another, and they're trying some version of a long kick pushing up the field. Not always, but based on the formation that you may have identified beforehand, they may do some different things. In one of the videos recently, we saw an example, and I'll put it up, where the team was playing a 3-3. It wasn't very well organized, but what they would do is they would play the ball in the corner, play it to this player here, who would look to just shoot it up towards this player to go one-on-one and hope for a good bounce. And in that game, they were successful for the first little bit, because my team was doing our usual pressing strategy, where my 9 or my 8, whoever was on that side, was coming in to put pressure on this player, but they never got anywhere close. But credit to my team, without any real direction from me, they figured out, oh, this is what they do. They're putting the ball on one corner, they play to that side, and then that player just boots that ball this way. So what my team started to do is, when they saw what side the ball went to, let's pull everybody up, they were very smart. Whoever was doing the pressing, they didn't go running to try and pressure this player, because they knew they weren't going to get there. They would just run and basically stop in front of them by a good 10 yards to keep them from taking any space. And now, whoa, I threw my player down. Now, my players then would just slide in here and pack this area. And when they tried to play that long ball in, looking for one of these players, they had bodies all around. They kept picking the ball off and just bringing it back at them. So understanding how they do goal kicks could help your team then adjust your pressing strategies to react to what they're doing. We played another game this year, a town that we would expect to be very skilled based on what else their town does. And we were kind of surprised by this team, because all they did was the goalkeeper passed the ball to the center back, and he literally toe kicked the ball down as far as he could over and over again. I haven't seen such a blatant use of that tactic in years, where you just play it down that way and send your big, fast, strong kids down there to try and out muscle and bully the other team. They scored 2 goals on us, excuse me, because we honestly were not expecting that from this team at all. And they had some big, fast kids, and they scored 2 goals before we figured that out. We adjusted our pressing strategy to be like, we're never going to get to this player. They're standing at the top of their 6, toe kicking it down. We were just blocking and putting a little depth behind to counter that strategy, and just pick that ball up and start bringing it back before they could rush their big, strong kids down on us. So that's number 2, is understanding how they're processing goal kicks, so that you can adjust your pressing strategy on the fly. And conversely, the other piece of that is understanding their pressing strategy. A lot of it goes with what formation they're playing, how they come and press the ball. But many times, because we, in some regards, are very methodical about how we play out of the back, it becomes apparent pretty quickly for at least any moderately decent coach to be like, hey, they do this every time. They're not kicking that ball long most of the time. We're playing that ball out, and we're looking for that option wide or in the middle or coming back and around. And so a lot of teams, of course, they just fly their players in at these players here, and most of the game We have an easy up and out. But then teams start to adjust. They're like, hey, they keep doing that to us. Let's go wide. So now when they start to go wide and take away that player, well, now because my team has multiple options, they play into the 8. Now the pressure kind of loops around like this. They think they're going to get him in the middle. And what do? We play out, we play around them. But it's up to really the goalkeeper to recognize that this and the center backs, but goalkeeper starts the play, right? Recognize, hey, the other team has caught on to what we do. They're starting to change the way that they're pressing us. Now let's change the way we play goal kicks. So it's having this in-game intelligence, really, of your team to be able to start to recognize what the other team is doing dynamically and making the decisions to do it without me on the sideline yelling in instructions, because this is the last year, that last year of 7v7 is probably the last year you're going to be able to reach the entire field with a good, decent bellow and get everybody's attention. 9v9 is double the size. That far player on the other side with parents on the other side and everything else, it's a challenge to get that communication off there. We want them to become more independent thinkers on the field. We're not joysticking them around the field. And teaching them those three things will help them immensely as they grow as soccer players. Now, where do you train these things? Well, you can do some of this chat during practices using your tactic board, like I said, but games are another learning opportunity. And being able to teach your players, whether it's on the sidelines, the subs that are waiting to go in, or at halftime or at full time, builds their base of knowledge up game after game to say, hey, what did we see? Did we recognize it? How did we react? How could we react? Asking all those questions to get them to understand this really, really is a skill for your players and your team to become much better players in general, because they become more independent on the field, because that's what they're going to need when it's 9v9, 11v11. You can't instruct them from a distance, everybody all at the same time. They need to be able to make those adjustments on the fly and talk to each other. So I hope this is useful for you. I know this can be done because my team has done it in the past and has served them well. We've seen a couple of video examples, hopefully, while I was chatting. Are there anything else that you think a team could learn to recognize on their own? I'd love to see in the comments. We don't get a lot of comments on the videos. We get very nice comments, but I don't get a lot of questions necessarily after the first couple of videos. I just find it interesting. I've said before, I have another channel that deals with playing drums and percussion. I get lots of comments, maybe because musicians are gearheads and they see their opinions about music and things like that. But if you get some comments out there, I'd love to have it. Otherwise, please subscribe, like, share, and hopefully this video is useful for you and your fellow coaches. Until next time, thanks a lot and have a great day. Bye.